Okay, let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for this beautiful day. We pray that you'll bless our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. So if you wandered in here and you want to be with Pastor Charles across the way in the other units, the auxiliary building, you're free to. I won't be offended if you get up and go over there. I'm going to ask people, too, that I don't usually do this. If you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel or subscribe on Rumble, I think you can also subscribe at RTN. And I haven't been very good about posting at RTN, so I'm going to start trying to do that again. But we have people continually telling me they've been unsubscribed. This is a pretty common thing among Christian ministries, that people just don't get a notice when we put things up. So sometimes I'll load things up put the update up a few different times on YouTube, because it seems like it gets around the algorithms the third time we put it up, that people actually start getting notices. So I don't know. I can't figure out social media, but if you want to subscribe, share this, we would greatly appreciate it. And those are some of the other places we are. And then if you just want the audio, go to Blog Talk Radio, Christian Sentinel. And a very good friend puts those up each week, edits the audio, edits out all my ums, ahs, and coughs and that type of thing. So we don't do that on the YouTube thing, so if you want the full measure of whatever's going on up here, then you can go to YouTube. But otherwise, you get the nice sanitized version of Christian Sentinel. And by the way, you can also listen. I have friends in the Middle East that listen to the update, and they just put it on 2x speed. They said, because you Westerners talk so slow compared to people over here in Israel and the Middle East. So if you want to cut down the time, so I can start going 3 hours and 20 minutes instead of an hour and 48 or something. Hopefully this week won't be as long. And then again, ldbc.ca, those are still up. Last Day's Bible Conference, Mike Gendron, Eric Barger, and J. Isaac Gabazon. You can find those. My talks they put up a couple hours together. And so you'll have to fast forward for about 45 minutes to find the second talk. Deplatforming Humanity, the Great Revealing of the Great Setup. And yes, that was a play on words. So I know it's the Great Reset, but I think it's the Great Setup for this. And then the very viral variants of the apostasy virus. Also, I've talked first hour today about the finger of God. We talked a little bit about the interconnectedness of Scripture, and how when it talks about Jesus writing in the earth in John chapter 8, what it really means and what it's connected. And I think it's highly connected. This is a picture that somebody made showing the connections between different scriptures. That's a lot. That looks like a mess, but if you could blow that up, you would see, Genesis connected to Revelation and back and forth. It's a very interesting thing. I will also say this. Last week, I did use this as my title slide. It's the little picture that is on YouTube in our landing page. And YouTube took it down immediately. Some other people downloaded and also posted on other YouTube channels. It was removed from that platform. Supposedly, it said I was supporting criminal terror organizations. And so I always say the algorithms are not, it's artificial intelligence, it's not artificial wisdom. As you know, I spoke out very strongly against what Hamas does. And but I appealed and YouTube restored it, but I put up a different title slide anyway. I used to use that title slide every week, but that's when we first started having trouble with YouTube. And I thought, well, it's been 3 or 4 years, so maybe I guess I can't get away with it. We talk about the convergence of events each week, the disrupted world. So I'm going to talk a little bit about culture, then we're going to talk about the Middle East, about this time that we live in. Well, I'll tie it up with some scriptures before, but I think it should be pretty clear right now that we are engaged in a massive spiritual battle in the world. People are calling good evil and evil good. It's happening on a massive scale. I think we'll see some interconnectedness between what's going on in Israel and what's going on everywhere else around the world. The attacks on Jews. Attacks on Jews in Israel, and look, there are attacks by Jews on Arabs in Israel too. There's very much civil unrest going on in Israel, even after this so-called ceasefire, which I think was the title that I had today. Ceasefire question mark. And the answer is, yeah, everybody's talking about a ceasefire, but I don't think they will be for long, and I'll explain why as we get close. And I have some scriptures that might tie into this. So here's just some stories that I've picked up, and I'll also fill them in with some others that I didn't have time to make a slide about because of, well, I didn't want this thing to be 8 hours long today. Computing Pioneer, this is from the national newspaper, The National in the United Arab Emirates. Computing Pioneer says people fail to grasp artificial intelligence's reach into their lives. Sir Nigel Shadbolt believes that the pervasive technology should be used to empower and not oppress us. And the exact opposite is happening. I mean, people are being we get shadow banned it's particularly on the public platforms. I know that, you post something on Facebook, and if it's not within the range of whatever the accepted politically correct speech is at Facebook, it gets shadow banned, and people might not see it for 2 or 3 weeks. But it's the world we live in, and we just have to work around it. There are some alternative platforms that are being developed. Frankly, I've tried to move to Telegram, but I find its interface to be, I haven't taken the time to figure it out. But this artificial intelligence stuff will be more and more invasive, I think. I think the other day, I can't remember, I think it was Pam and I were someplace, and we said, I wonder where that is in the store. And I said, well, we just need to talk about it, and we'll start getting notices about it, and it'll show. And it does do this all the time. Except I don't get any videos about improving my putting. And that's one of the things that's troubling in my life. So I haven't talked about this, but there was this ransomware attack on the Colonial Pipeline a couple weeks ago. The effects of that are still rippling through the economy. I heard this morning that maybe in the Washington, D.C. area, 91% of the gas stations are out of fuel currently. I don't know if this is true. I didn't have time to verify it. I just heard somebody talking about this. Part of me wants to say, well, if they can't go to work, that's a good thing in Washington, D.C. That would actually be okay. But this is something that we're going to see. There's been a big disruption in the supply chain. You're going to see, it's going to be sort of peaks and valleys of this. You're going to see things like stocks go way up and then go down, then way up and then down. You're going to see, now I hear property values may be starting to fall even around here. So the Colonial Pipeline supposedly paid a ransom to this gang of people. I don't know if the gang of people, some people say they were sort of Russian mafia guys. I personally think if they acted with the approval of the head of Russia, and they're all former KGB people who are trying to cause disruption anyway. And this is the state of modern warfare. It's asymmetrical. You see a lot of that, what's going on in the conflict between Israel and Iran's proxies in the Middle East. Well, really, a lot of people in conflict with Iran and Iran's proxies in the Middle East. It's an asymmetrical warfare. It's not the traditional, guys marching across a field and tank, either, with muskets or guns or tanks or whatever. It's just things have changed, and it's very asymmetrical. So a small force that's very committed, that has a very tight command structure, can wreak a lot of havoc against the big army. And now we have the development of drones. I'll talk a little bit about that later. This is an interesting thing. I talked about this a few years ago, and somebody said, John, you don't know what you're talking about. The way Bitcoin operates is that it mines through these servers. It conducts calculations. They take a lot of power, and the concern a few years ago was that Bitcoin used so much power as it developed. It's taking over. It's going to be the biggest thing to consume power in the world. Elon Musk and Tesla this week said, we're not going to accept Bitcoin for our automobiles anymore because it is, I'm getting some feedback too, guys. The cryptocurrency is using too much power. And here's an article just yesterday. It's reviving older power stations because they need the power to run these computers to do Bitcoin. And if you see these server farms popping up, I know some of the big tech companies have built server farms here around Columbus. They usually don't have a name on them. They have a high security. You'll see a lot of backup generators. Those are usually server farms that run all this stuff. Google just doesn't exist out there somewhere. It's on a computer server someplace to do all these searches. All the computer companies are. So this is a thing about median home prices. Seem to be falling a little bit, and the length of time, the supply of homes at the current place would be sold out in 2.4 months now. And you can see it used to be 4, almost 5 months a year ago now, and how it got down below 2 months. And if you know people that are realtors, they will tell you all these stories about putting a house on the market if it's in the right price range and having 50, 60, 80, 85 showings in just 36 hours. It's insane. Of course, if you sell your house, you got to go find one. You got to get in line with all those other people. So it's kind of a mixed thing. But certain areas of the country are doing very well, like Columbus, because we have a lot of tech companies and finance and that sort of thing. People want to move here. I've had some friends of mine, they've had people from New York City drive up to their house and say, I'll pay you X amount for your house, close in a week, all cash. No contingencies. And to which my friend says, well, where am I going to move in a week? That's, and it's a little difficult to transition there. This is a story out of the Wall Street Journal about the drought in California. These are almond trees that are not going to receive water this year. The feds aren't supplying water. There are some private contractors that supply water, but I'm trying to think, it was like $100 per acre foot of water. That's to cover an acre, 1 foot. Used to be $100, now it's gone up to over $400. That affects the price of vegetables and that things you buy. These are almond trees that may not give anything this year. Here, this is a quote out of the article. The speed of this drought has caught many off guard. As of early April, the Bureau of Reclamation had planned to give farmers in the Central Valley and Klamath River 5% of their allotted supplies. That's not much. Even that proved too much after forecasted runoff from melting snows failed to materialize. At Shasta Lake, California's largest reservoir, the Bureau had expected a 500,000 acre feet of runoff, but the ground in the mountains was so dry it sopped up most of the water, which means they're not giving anything to these farmers, zero. And this is sort of the insanity of modern politics. So we know what happened when they shut down the Colonial Pipeline, right? There's gas shortages everywhere. So what does the crazy governor in the state just to the north of us do? She's cutting off a pipeline where there's never been a pipeline spill because she says it's environmentally risky. It's going to put hundreds and hundreds of people out of work. It's like Biden shut off the big Keystone Pipeline, which put over 10,000 people out of work immediately. The great president who wants to give everybody a job, right? No, he wants to give everybody money, not necessarily tied it to a job. The same president and his administration who can't see that if you pay people more not to work than they were making working, they might stay home. When you see what's going on in our world and culture right now, you know that the world has lost its collective mind, and that is a judgment from God. People lose the ability to reason. If you want to see how people lose the ability to reason, I would suggest you just go watch the daily presidential press briefing. You know, if you can stand to do it for 10 minutes or an hour or whatever, and you will see numerous examples of the ministry of truth in operation. That's a reference to 1984. So what Gretchen Whitmer, the governor in New York, or I'm sorry, Michigan, wish she was in New York. I have family that lives in Michigan. She's cutting off this pipeline from Canada. Canada's not happy about it. Canada's not happy about the Keystone Pipeline. Now, the Keystone Pipeline, all that oil is going to still be brought out of the ground, mined or whatever you do to it, drill for it, and it's going to go someplace, and they're going to transport it by rail, which is much more risky than pipeline. Pipelines do have accidents, but the scale of pipeline accidents is so far below. You've heard about the trains that broke away, that ran into towns in Quebec and burned the town down and exploded the whole town and killed 50, 60, 70 people. That doesn't happen with the pipeline. And the other interesting thing, I don't have a slide for this, is that Biden cut off the Keystone Pipeline, which employed Americans. This week, he removed the sanctions that, and the Europeans were removing the sanctions that they'd put in against the Nord Stream 2 project for transporting gas by pipeline through the North Sea to Europe. So here's a president who's giving Putin something that Putin really wants. And what has the narrative been for the last 5 years about somebody else colluding with Russia? I would highly recommend, if you find it, I'm not going to play it because I'm afraid that it would probably get our video pulled down. And I don't agree with him theologically or anything, okay? And I'm not saying that you got it right. But Glenn Beck had an epic rant the other night, and he just said, it's ridiculous. You know, people sold plutonium to Russia. They wonder if there's corruption in the Biden family, but they can't authenticate the emails. And he says, what do you mean you can't authenticate them? The people that sent the emails have authenticated them. And nobody's going to jail. What is going on? I'm tired of it. And he's right. And so now here we have another example of the president removing sanctions on Russia. Ask yourself, under the first two Obama administrations, and forget what's going on in the third Obama administration, what did Obama ever do from a foreign policy standpoint that did not advance the interests of Russia? You can email me your answer. I doubt that I'll get one, because he didn't. And then what did they do? They turn it around. So Glenn Beck, as an example, he says that the reporter is there and there's cars and buildings burning behind him, and he says, I'm here at the peaceful protest. What are you going to believe? The propagandist or your lying eyes, It's insane. So here's a new book. This is being pushed down to kindergarten levels in schools. They, she, he, me, free to be. And it's written by a transgender activist. Here's an example. Kelly Troutner, she recommends it on her page. Share my lesson. And they say social justice and activist books. And they admit this is what it is, and this is what they're pushing on kids. It's insane. She's the health issues director for the American Federation of Teachers. Oh, look at the stuff they have here. Bend and breathe yoga. Do you look, it's hard to be against this when you have Christian yoga infecting some of our churches. Mindfulness, that's another big term that they have. So you have all this spirituality stuff, and they're pushing it on kids. Here's another book by this same person, School Edition, The Gender Wheel. And this is the gender wheel so little kiddies can figure out which gender they are. It's also interesting, isn't it, that when people have sex reassignment surgeries, there are only two options. What's your pronoun? The gender wheel curriculum, pronoun protocol for creating gender-inclusive spaces for kids in public settings. Here is North Carolina is getting into this stuff. Here it is. This is the page I was looking for. They, she, he, me, free to be. What's the title of the page? Social Justice Books. Found only in the finest bookstores and maybe your local church bookstore if they have one. I saw an article this week, don't have a copy of it either. Lady went into Barnes & Noble to the kids section, and it was just filled with social justice books for kindergartners. And I think Mr. Beck even mentioned that. I forget, somebody said, what are we teaching our kids? I see a little kid who complained about a certain mandate at his school down in Orlando, where they don't have that mandate for the public at large, but the school still has it in place. And he said, this is silly. I was waiting in line to get a drink, and my teacher told me I had to put my you-know-what up over my nose. I'm getting a drink. She said, you have to get a drink in the car on the way home with your mother. And she's yelling at me, and she doesn't have that on her face. You know what that is. And he said, I ran into her at the store the other night. She's been my teacher for a year. She didn't recognize me, he said. He's 10 years old. She didn't recognize me because she's never seen my face. What are we doing to these? This is... and I don't explain to me what the policy regarding these things is because it changes all the time. So anyway, that'll probably get the video pulled. Here's New York City Education Department and the local PBS station face a backlash for showing drag queen to young children. These are kindergartners. This is a PBS store for kindergarten through third grade, having this drag queen who wrote a book. I don't know, whoever this person is, identifies as Lil Miss Hot Mess. And the book that she has is The Hips on the Drag Queen Goes Swish, 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 so the wheels on the bus go round and round. And this is on the PBS website. Let's Learn. The Department of Education, New York Department of Education, in partnership with the WNET Group, is launching new episodes of the public television program Let's Learn, which features lessons for children in age 3 to kindergarten through second grade, that will continue to serve as a supplemental resource source for remote and blended learning. And here's a picture. I am sparing you the audio. This is for 3-year-old kids. Do you think God's going to judge a culture that does this? This is called grooming. It's not education, it's grooming children. It's sick, it's twisted, it's immoral. And it's being pushed by almost every school around there. It affects the church. Bishop-elect Megan Rohr. The First Council of Nicaea's first action was to try to limit the leadership roles of trans pastors and bishops. By the way, I looked at the Council of Nicaea's findings. I did not see anything about trans pastors in there. I'm grateful the Lutherans of the LELCA are beginning to dismantle this and some of the other hurdles BIPOC and LGBTQ pastors encounter. In federal court, I told you about the College of Ozarks a few weeks ago. They're in federal court trying to get an injunction based on religious liberty grounds to be exempted from the Biden administration directive that says that the sex discrimination part of the Civil Rights Act, which nobody thinks belongs to gender identification. If you think it does, amend the statute. You're acting like you have everybody in power. They don't. So they changed. The Trump administration said, we think this is stupid. So we're not going to say that the sex there means male-female. Discrimination doesn't mean transgenders, gender identification stuff. So College of the Ozarks went to federal court. Judge denied their request to be exempted from that directive, which means that they now cannot have male-only or female-only dorms. Transgender people, sports locker rooms, dorm rooms, and that type of thing. Now, they're going to appeal it, but this is problematic. Judge Roseanne Ketchmark, I'm just going to have you guess who appointed her to the bench, ruled against providing a temporary restraining order and a preliminary injunction to the Christian Liberal Arts School Wednesday after an online hearing. So the hearing's online, okay, but your kid could be forced to room with someone from the opposite sex. And that won't be online. You understand? At a Christian college. She said the college would not be immune from litigation regarding claims of housing discrimination if it attempted to disregard the Biden regulation. And they essentially said, listen, they didn't really have anybody who'd been wronged by this, so you really don't have a leg to stand on. I mean, if it actually happens that somebody ends up, that somebody's wrong, we'll come back and we'll litigate in the future because we don't know that it'll happen. Do you think this school's going to be targeted now? I can almost guarantee it. I was looking at some of the old Time magazine covers. Do you think Time magazine has gone woke? Look at these covers. Woman versus pandemic. We are not silent. The lost year. Climate is everything. 100 most influential companies. Visions of equity is the current cover of Time. It's insane. Here's a story out of the Times in the UK. On the right is the cover page of a report that came out. What happened was last year, these two professors were supposed to speak at some conferences or things on campus, and they were targeted because in the past they have stood up for traditional sex roles, so they're called transphobic. They might stand for traditional marriage. And the report, I don't know where they found the wimp that did this thing, the lawyer that did this, because he essentially said, well, some of the things, I'm not sure they were denied this because of their views. The school denied them coming because they were afraid people would react badly to them. And I've seen pictures of the posters that were posted all over campus, flyers that were distributed that use words about these female professors that I can't even say here. I couldn't even figure out how to do it. The one was a gun with an F word and sort of an epithet that they've come up with called TERF, which has something to do with something feminine, radical feminist. You can look it up, TERF. It's used all the time. And here's what this report says in one part. The decision also engages Professor Friedman's right to freedom of assembly and her right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. In respect to the latter, the law is not settled as to whether gender critical or similar views are protected. It is important to note that recent employment tribunal case in which this has been considered, I talked about that a couple weeks ago, a lady that got fired, concluded only that the absolutist view that sex is immutable did not satisfy the legal test on the basis that it was not worthy of respect in a democratic society, whereas views about the access of trans people to single-sex spaces did not fall into this category. The case is therefore of limited application and in any event is not binding authority and is subject to a current appeal. You know, that's a nice way of saying is, I really don't want to look at that. It's infecting our military. Used to be the greatest, a lot of people said the greatest military on earth. Here's a recent recruiting ad. I'm just going to play a little part of it. There was a woke person ad for the CIA recently. Listen, everything that you thought goes on in Washington about people in these organizations maybe still being patriots or that type of thing, just blow that up because they're purging those people out. Here is, listen, I'm not saying this is a bad person or anything like that. I'm just saying look at the imagery and everything that's used in this ad to recruit for the Army.
This is the story of a soldier who operates your nation's Patriot missile defense systems. It begins in California, with a little girl raised by two moms. Although I had a fairly typical childhood, took ballet, played violin, I also marched for equality. I like to think I've been defending freedom from an early age. When I was 6 years old, one of my moms had an accident that left her paralyzed. Doctors said she might never walk again. But she tapped into my family's pride to get back on her feet, eventually standing at the altar to marry my other mom. With such powerful role models, I finished high school at the top of my class.
Well, it goes on. But do you see the imagery there? Do you see what's going on? I mean, obviously, you've got to be able to see what's going on there. This is an article in this morning's Washington Post that the Supreme Court precedent takes a level. Now, so this is a left-wing writer complaining about the conservative Supreme Court not respecting precedent and maybe going to overturn other cases. Why are they concerned about it? Because they said they're going to take this Mississippi case about abortion, banning abortion after 15 weeks. And they're getting ready for it. And look, the answer is, if everybody supports it, just go to the political process and you'll win. And some states won't have it and some states will. But no, we've got to get everybody to conform to the pro-abortion side of things. And so they're having a hissy fit about they're not respecting precedent. Hey, I was in law school a few years after Roe versus Wade came down. Nobody in Roe versus Wade respected precedent either. They made it up. Even liberal professors that I had said, this is a whole made-up thing. This is new way of looking at things. So don't tell me, Ruth Marcus, about you're concerned about that you're concerned about this because, well, so listen. I'm hopeful something will happen. I don't know. We'll hear this term. So they're upset, and they talk about that Trump packed the court. No, he just selected people that he thought might be ideologically aligned with a lot of the people that voted for him. They're going to pack the court. They've already introduced legislation. They've got a commission for that and legislation. So I think this is about the last of I have one more cultural thing. Two more. Scientific American, new article just out, Deadly Kingdom, the next deadly plague. What are they talking about? Fungus and antibiotic-resistant organisms. Listen, we know that this pestilence thing is coming, so we should expect people to be talking about it. And you'll see a lot of articles. If you want to go look up India black fungus, they seem to have an outbreak of this. And I don't know if you've seen this, it's pretty horrific when people get it because of the lesions and stuff. I mean, people are having to have their eyes taken out to save their lives. And this is, they're relating it to COVID. I don't know if there's any studies to do that. They're just saying there's a lot of COVID positive people that have recovered from COVID, have immune compromised systems, and they're getting this black fungus, which seems to be predominant in India. Listen, we live in a world where the Bible tells us these things are coming, so we shouldn't be surprised that they're coming. And maybe it's made up, I don't know, but it does seem to be a problem. And then what was this? Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity. Participants of the Abrahamic Faith Initiative meet with Pope Francis. This is an article, well, I guess this was from about a year ago, and they're coming back and they're having more. I don't have, there's two other things I have. One is the French, oh, there it is. The French generals have come out and said that the government is really in dangerous territory. They've had 120 flag, and they also were followed on by several thousand soldiers, military members, who agree with what these generals said. Now, it's being portrayed as, there's an insurrection brewing and that type of thing, and now we've had 125 retired flag officers in the United States come out with a letter that says essentially the same thing, because they're concerned about the direction that the country is going. They warn against H1 or S1, whatever it is, the Change Elections Forever Act, whatever it's called. That's what I call it. So this is a problem. I also saw a report this week where the Department of the Navy is now pushing critical race theory instruction as a priority, and a priority in selecting people. Now, how did this happen? Well, it was well known during the Obama administration that Obama was purging the military leadership, and I think that would also include professors at the military academies of people who had conservative traditional values, and putting in left-leaning or outright leftist Marxists in our military. And look at the Secretary of Defense that we have now and all the things that he's doing. He's tearing the whole thing down. To the point where, do you think a Putin or a Xi from China will respect our military very soon? I don't think so. So let's look at, this is going to be a bit of a jumble because there are a lot of things happening this week. So there was this conflict, war, I don't know what else you would call it, that broke out between Israel and Hamas. Actually, Israel and Iran, because Iran funds Hamas. There were many interviews released with people from Hamas, including the head of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, I think, Haniyeh, as you say. I'll show you a little clip of him in a short bit. But they came out and they said, we want to thank Iran for their support and money. But now, when you look at what is this thing has moved to a ceasefire, there's like $1 billion coming to Hamas. What do you think they're going to do with it? They're paying them. It's insane. I don't know I knew who's running the show. It's a repeat of what we saw in the prior administration. So an Islamic Jihad commander was killed, and there's a lot of back and forth. What happened? Was Israel successful? Was it not successful? But let's look at some of the responses to what's going on, because that's where I think the real thing is, and that relates to Bible prophecy. Here's Erdogan. Israel proves it is a terror state. One article, this is from the Times of London, TikTok is the Middle East time bomb. And what happened was that they put up these short little videos, slapping a Jew or beating up a Jew, and posted it on TikTok, and it just inflamed and emboldened everybody to do this. So now we see it happening It's not happening just in Israel, it's happening all over the world. This is from this is from Daily Sabah, a Turkish paper. Israel's prolonged violence is the biggest obstacle to peace. This is an Erdogan mouthpiece. So if you want to understand, read Daily Sabah, S-A-B-A-H, and you'll find out what Erdogan is thinking. So Israel's the biggest. So here's Erdogan, who a few months ago was making nice with Israel. I want to get back on good relations with Israel. A little conflict comes up, and where does he land? He lands where his real sentiments really are. Another opinion piece from Daily Sabah. Jerusalem will not be another Andalusia. That's southern Spain. The Muslims were essentially kicked out of there, along with Jews in 1492 by Queen Isabella. It's long been thought of an area where people live in peaceful coexistence, Muslims and non-Muslims. So here's this guy from Erdogan's news piece saying, that's not going to happen in Jerusalem. It's war in Jerusalem. It's going to continue. So while there's a ceasefire, you'll quickly see this. Here's Vladimir Putin. He gave a speech to his Central Security Council recently, and the subtitles, this is the video, he's speaking in Russian, but he says this. He's on a Zoom call with all these people, a big screen with all these people on it. I would like to ask our colleagues to speak about the situation in the Middle East, namely about the aggravation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which is taking place in close proximity to our borders and directly concerns our security interest. Now, that seems strange to a lot of people that watch this. So this is what one independent Russian news piece said, explaining what Putin meant by the proximity of the region to Russia's borders. And if you look at a map, it's not even close. I mean, Russia's a long way from the northern border of Israel, even further from Gaza. But, of course, Russia has a big presence in Syria. So this is what the Moscow Times said. Explaining what Putin meant by the proximity of the region to Russia's borders, Kremlin Press Secretary Dmitry Peskov said, many countries there have difficult relations. The region has a somewhat fragile system of security and a huge lack of mutual trust. The potential for conflict does not contribute to the stabilization of the region. The Middle East is not on another continent. It is a region adjacent to us. Were this conflict to continually spread uncontrollably, it would obviously pose a danger to Russia, he added. So that's how you interpret what Putin said. People pointed out, boy, Russia sure seems upset with what's going on. Russia under Putin has been tolerant of Israel's attacks on Iranian proxies and Iranian facilities and manufacturing facilities in Syria. There's a lot of things that you could analyze. I mean, one of the things that seems different this time, back in 2014, there was a conflict between Israel and Gaza. Israel went in. It was a 5 or 6 week operation. They took out facilities, and it's very difficult to go into Gaza because it's densely populated. There would be a lot of casualties if they went in, unless they were very, very lucky. So this is why you have this operation that Caroline Glick refers to as mowing the lawn in Gaza. Every now and then we have to mow the lawn in Gaza. This time it's been 7 years, but the difference between 2021 and 2014, when the last operation took place, is the whole region is more unstable. And in Egypt, you have Egypt and Sudan conducting war drills because they look like they might go to war with Ethiopia over the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, GERD for short. Just think of it as GERD, the dam in Ethiopia is giving a bad case of GERD to Egypt. They're getting a lot of heartburn over it. You have Syria, which has melted down even further. I don't know if I think I have a slide on this, but here's a question. So, there were people that died in Gaza. We don't like that. We'd like to have no war and nobody die. But that doesn't seem to be the way the world is. So all these people are running around, there were 60 children that were killed in Gaza. Well, about a fourth of them, by the way, were killed by Hamas rockets that didn't make it out of Gaza. Hamas rocket hit one of their main water treatment facilities or power plants or both and took it out. It was destroyed by Hamas rocket, not Israel. But here's the question. And listen, the living conditions in a large part of Gaza are horrific. First hour I told you about Tel Balata refugee camp in the city of Nablus. Every square in Nablus, every intersection is a martyr square. The people have been radicalized there by and large. Not everyone, but there's a large group of radicalized people there. Maybe that's a better way to say it. So I'm not saying all Arabs are bad, but there is a certain ideology that drives some people, some of whom happen to be Arabs, some of whom happen to be Persian, some of whom happen to be Turks. And we do not want these people. We have to deal with these people because lives are at stake. So, where are the protests about the maybe million people that have died in Syria in the last 10 years? And I'm guessing the number of children are over 150,000. Where are the protests about the Palestinians who've been displaced and had their homes there in some of the worst refugee camps anywhere destroyed? And as one of our generals said, got them on the road to become someone else's problems. Over half the people in Syria don't live where they lived 10 years ago. And it's not because they were moving to, the Syrian Silicon Valley, living in war zones, and they got to get out of there. But do you see the squad from our Congress? Are they out there protesting what's happened in Syria to Arabs, to Palestinians? Show me one that said anything about it. What's going on? It's because they hate Jews. They can sit there and say they're not against Jews all day long. It doesn't work. When it comes to these people, the squad and others like them, if the old saying applies, if hypocrisy was water, they would drown. The world would drown because they're such hypocrites. So Melanie Phillips has a great article at her website, The Last Overlooked but Still Active Front of World War II, Current Convulsions Are Far More Momentous Than Many Realize. So I'm sure a little bit of this article Caroline Glick and some others, this is different what's going on. The internal conflict that it's causing and the worldwide problem. And so anywhere that the United States or other governments are not standing against what's being done to Jews, they're having the same things happen in their country. The United States is weak on it. Jews are attacked in New York and Los Angeles and elsewhere. The UK, if can't find them saying anything about it for the most part. Jewish roving Palestinian militias in London. Same thing in Paris, Brussels. All these places do not stand against this, are having the same thing happen to them. I think it's a judgment of God. So here's what Melanie Phillips says. Our current convulsions with the Jewish people are under murderous and venomous attack, both in Israel and the diaspora, are far more momentous than many may realize. Israel, where a ceasefire of the conflict in Gaza has been announced, remain under fire from the rocket barrages aimed at killing Israeli civilians in the final hours before it was due to take effect. Tensions over attacks by Israeli Arabs on Israeli Jews, with some ugly retaliation by Jewish extremists, remain high. But the violence is not confined to the Middle East. There has been a huge upsurge in attacks on diaspora Jews in Britain, Europe, and America. And here's a protest that took place. This is an estimated 180,000 people. This is, if you've been to London, you might recognize this as the area of Hyde Park and Speaker's Corner, where free speech is. So almost 200,000 people came out. It wasn't in support of Israel. It was totally in support. Look at the signs: Free Palestine. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Do you see any Israeli flags in there? Do you see any Palestinian flags by any chance? So this is a very famous part of London. They marched down through central London. I mean, I was there a couple years ago. It's a pretty amazing thing. On the streets of European cities, Melanie Phillips says, demonstrators have been screaming for the destruction of Israel and chanting that the army of Muhammad has returned to slaughter the Jews. Britain's Jewish defense organization, the Community Security Trust, reports at least a 5-fold increase in anti-Semitic incidents over the course of the Gaza war. The most dramatic example was a 4-hour-long motorcade festooned with Palestinian flags, whose occupants drove around Jewish areas of North London screaming abuse. One of these thugs used a megaphone to scream, "F the Jews, F their daughters, F their mothers, rape their daughters, and free Palestine." This is a picture of a protest in Brussels. This is another protest. It's either Paris or Brussels. Maybe it's Stockholm. I don't know. It's one of the European capitals. Israelis living in Los Angeles say that while they were dining at a restaurant in the city, dozens of people waving Palestinian flags badly beat them after asking them, chillingly asking them, who is Jewish? Everyone who does these things against Israel or refuses to speak out are suffering the same thing that Israelis are suffering: Arab riots and militias. What do you do to Israel will be done to you. This is very prescient of Melanie Phillips to say this. So here's a picture of Sweden. Here is a picture that I think is a victory celebration in Gaza. So the ceasefire comes into effect, and Hamas says, we won, we won, we won. And to some extent, I can't disagree with them, because they weren't defeated. I'll share a little bit about that in just a moment. Here's what happened in the Temple Mount on Friday. These are pictures from Al-Akhbar, the Hezbollah newspaper in Beirut. Here's another one. I think this is London. Yeah, there's the big eye back there. And you can slow it down if you want, but I won't, and read the signs and everything. Some of the signs are not printable, but it's all about supporting Gaza. This is London. This is an interesting story from Daily Sabah. This is what happened in Austria, in Vienna, Austria, where they're having the talks with Iran. Guess what they did at the one of the main government buildings in Austria, Vienna? The premier or prime minister, whatever he is, had an Israeli flag put up. Well, Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, he didn't even get off the plane when he heard about that. I'm not going where they have an Israeli flag, because he's not really about peace, you understand? It's all fake when he says he's about peace. Even Erdogan got upset. I condemn this Austrian state that flies the Israeli flag from its chancellery building. Flying a flag of a terrorist state from an official building amounts to living under the protection of terrorism. And he even had his Twitter feed, we demand the despicable attacks against the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Muslims to be stopped immediately. Let me say something about that. So we saw the riots. I don't think disturbances, riots, one man's riot is another person's disturbance, is another man's peaceful protest. Whatever was going on in the Temple Mount was a disturbance at best. They had rocks stored up. They were flying, they were shooting, throwing rocks and petrol bombs at the police that came to the Temple Mount. By the way, I'm trying to find this is from the Washington Post this morning. So down here in the fine print, what you will see is they threw rocks and petrol bombs at police officers in, quote, riots. Why did they put the riots in square quotes? Because of the Washington Post, and they can't tell the truth. You know, they're the people who'll get their reporters out there and say that the building is burning down behind them, and they'll say, it's just a peaceful protest that we're here at. Oh, yeah, it looks like somebody got out of control. And so the propaganda machine, the ministry of truth, is in full force. So back to so Erdogan publishes this. Here's from the Jerusalem Post. Seth Fransman has a good article the other day. Israel can't ignore Gulf condemnation of violence. I think Jerusalem Post has done a good job. I think even Haaretz has occasionally gotten a good article here recently. If you want to read them, Turkey, Erdogan is using the riots that are going on in Israel between Arabs and Jews to build his image up. This is what he wants to do. Arab ministers held a virtual foreign meeting. The Organization of Islamic Countries, the OIC, held a virtual meeting to talk about this Israeli problem. And you see Saudi Arabia, all the Arab countries participated. Here's just a few of the comments of the foreign minister of Turkey.
These efforts should also include physical protection through forming an international protection force with military and financial contributions of the willing countries. Second, holding the relevant Israeli political and military authorities accountable is necessary, and the International Criminal Court has a special role in this. Third, we should actively support the elections in Palestine as well as intra-Palestinian reconciliation. Brothers and sisters, there are a few who have lost their moral compass and voice support for Israel. It is
Okay, so what he said there was, and the reason I played him was because he's about the only one that spoke in English that I could even begin to understand. But he said, listen, so we got to support Palestinian elections. Why does he support Palestinian elections? Why does Erdogan, his boss, support them? Because Hamas would win. Why do they want Hamas to win? Because Erdogan is a Muslim Brotherhood guy. And Hamas is a Muslim Brotherhood organization. And their charter from 1988, you can find in a line, says, we want to get rid of the Jews, not just Israel, the Jews. They have no interest in peace. So do you think that they would, so in a way it's good because it would pretty much put the nail in the coffin of that two-state solution thing. Here's an interesting editorial cartoon is, and so the other thing that the foreign minister of Turkey said was those who have lost their moral footing, and what he was indirectly saying, you people who have entered into the Abraham Accords and the normalization group agreements with Israel, you've lost your moral compass. And this was an interesting editorial cartoon. You see from the rockets, and it's pretty much destroyed those who were trumpeting Middle East peace or Middle East truths. Back to Melanie Phillips. She says this, these appalling events are not the result of just another conflict between Israel and the Palestinians provoking a predictable anti-Israel reaction. What's happening now is that the Palestinian war against Israel has been reframed as a war against the Jews. Diaspora Jews are being physically and verbally attacked, their children intimidated, and their synagogues vandalized. This is not just in Israel, this is around the world. But it is being reinforced by extreme hostility to Israel from Western progressives. These self-professed anti-racists tell themselves that they are on the side of angels. But while they may genuinely be generally horrified by the attacks on Jewish people in their cities, they refuse to acknowledge that their own stance on Israel is profoundly anti-Jew. It's not just the twisted reporting, distortions, and blood libels straight from the Hamas propaganda playbook that have been transmitted around the clock by the BBC, Sky UK, The Guardian, The New York Times, and much of the rest of the mainstream media. Worse still is the intensity of the perverse and unjustified passions which Israel is demonized. And she was interviewed on the BBC, it was either Sky News or BBC on some program, and they had a pro-Hamas person on talking about how evil Israel is. And I love Melanie Phillips. At times I don't agree with her all the time, but she looked at the guy and she said, you know, it's hard to sit here on a panel with an ignoramus. Or somebody so willfully ignorant. So I love her direct forthrightness. It's the spitting outrage that not enough Israelis are dying to justify military action to stop the thousands of incoming rockets. It's the furious and contemptuous dismissal of the fact that the Israel Defense Forces uniquely warn of impending rocket strikes against civilian targets in order to save civilian life. Now, when I was at the Christ at the Checkpoint conference about 4 years ago, 3.5 years ago, I sat next to a Palestinian doctor, lives in Canada now, Toronto. Very intelligent guy, very cordial, but clearly a Muslim and clearly pro-Palestinian. And my question to him was, look, I know you're upset. You had family, I believe 3 or 4 of his daughters were killed in one of the Gaza exchanges of rockets with Israel. By the way, I think the number of rockets that Gaza has fired into Israel now exceeds 30,000 over the last 20 years, including over 4,000 this time. But we also know that about 25% of the rockets didn't make it out of Gaza. They landed within Gaza. So the tragedy where this man, and I have no reason to doubt him, that he lost family members and nieces, daughters and nieces. It could have been a misfired rocket from his own people, but he blames Israel. And I asked him, I said, why don't you complain about the treatment of Palestinians, if you want to call them Palestinians, go ahead, in Jordan, where they can't vote, in Syria, where they can't vote, in Lebanon, where they can't vote? Why do you never complain about the squalor of the refugee camps in those places? And there was a male couple sitting there. They're from some church, some denomination, and they had the Palestinian keffiyeh on, you know, the terror symbol. And they're kind of looking at me like, how did this guy get in here? What's he doing at our dinner table? And I'm like, hey, I was here first. You all sat down here. That's a God thing, I think. I didn't say that, but that's what I'm thinking. But he didn't have an answer, and he then had to go finish prep for his talk. He was the keynote speaker that evening. But he didn't have an answer because they never do. They never see the hypocrisy. So here's a little slide. I don't think this is accurate. 10 years later, key numbers in the war of Syria. 60% of the country controlled by the regime. It says 387,000 people killed and 200,000 missing. I think that number is half of what it really is. But then the other thing that you've seen this week is the Iranians, they're coming out, they have these new drones. This drone, look at what this drone can do. Now, look, could this all be fake? It could be, but there were Iranian drones being launched into Israel in this last conflict. Unveiling a new Iranian unmanned aerial vehicle named, guess what it's named? Gaza. With a flight duration of 35 hours, carrying 13 bombs and an operating radius of 2,000 kilometers, as well as the ability to carry 500 kilograms of electronic equipment. They, I think, got one of the drones of ours that they shot down that cost $200 million, and they reversed engineered it. And so they're rolling this thing out. And so here, just a little more from Melanie Phillips. It's impossible to avoid the conclusion that the explanation for this otherwise inexplicable perversity towards the Jewish state is a desire to denounce Jews simply because they are Jews. For what is shockingly clear from this unique pathology is that there is a profound need in the West for the Jews to be proved bad people. Among the Jews, Israel haters is a breathless eagerness for the moment when they can shout, gotcha, and then put the Jews into the public pillory. The causes of this are undoubtedly complex, but the main reason is surely that they can't tolerate the idea that the chosen people, a term they misrepresent as privileged in today's terminology, despite the Jews' belief that they are chosen instead for an onerous set of duties, may be morally superior to them. So if they can't be like the Jews, they'll make sure the Jews are pulled down. And who is he showing here? The Mufti. She's showing pictures of the Mufti in Nazi Germany, trying to figure out a solution for the Jews. So they've taken to task a boss, Caroline Glick. You can look up her article at carolineglick.com. By the way, she does about an hour podcast, and she keeps it to an hour. Bless her heart. But she goes, how will we know who won the war? And she's like, she looks at this is a scene of the head of the Hamas in Qatar. He doesn't live in Gaza, by the way. He lives in Qatar. And he's giving a speech about, he says this: Jerusalem unites us. Today, the geographical barriers within historic Palestine have been removed. Today, Palestine is waging an intifada from Rosh Hanikra to Eilat. They have thought that 70 years or more could kill the spirit of belonging of our people within the occupied land in 1948. They thought that people would lose their identity and would assimilate in the Zionist entity, but today our people within the 1948 borders are defending the Al-Aqsa Mosque. There's also a former member of the Knesset who would be arrested if he came back, and he's giving a speech, and they're talking, and Caroline says, look, the axis of this that supports Hamas begins in Iran, continues through Qatar and Turkey, Syria, and Lebanon, and then moves to the west to the European Union and to progressive activists and lawmakers in the Democrat Party in the U.S. And this person, Bashara, a former Knesset member who fled to Qatar just before he was arrested for treason for spying for Hezbollah in the 2006 war, serves today as a senior advisor to the Emir of Qatar. In an interview with Al Arabi Network last week, Bashar discussed the expanding ties between the American left and the Hamas-Iran axis. This is what Trevor Loudon has called the red-green axis. Today, Bashar maintained the situation in Washington has changed. In the long run, he maintained we should rely on the grassroots of the Democrat Party. There are more Arabs and Muslims among these activists now. There are more African Americans and leftists there. These people constitute the pressure group within the Democrat Party and elsewhere. We should put our trust in them for the long run. There's been a sea change. And she says, look, this is going on. AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib. Then she refers to a clip. This is a clip of Jen Psaki, the White House person in charge of the Ministry of Truth, speaking on Air Force One about the prior administration. Listen to this. It's about a minute long.
Is there some idea that it might be time to rethink the thinking behind the Abraham Accords, which basically, if you sort of open them up, what they really seem to say is that, forget the Palestinians, they're not a problem. We're just going to move on. And this clearly seems to have shown that that's not true, right?
Again, I would say that we are not following the same tactics of the prior administration. The president has reinstated humanitarian assistance and security assistance to the Palestinians. That's something that was stopped back in 2018, and we felt was not a constructive action by the prior administration. Aside from putting forward a peace proposal that was dead on arrival, we don't think they did anything constructive, really, to bring an end to the long-standing conflict in the Middle East. So obviously we're dealing with a conflict that is happening as we speak, right? It is happening on the ground. People's lives are lost. There's ongoing violence. We're going to work to resolve that, but our view continues to be that providing that humanitarian and security assistance to the Palestinians while still maintaining our long-standing security relationship with Israel is in the interest of the United States, and a two-state solution, which both parties would have to get together to agree on, is the only way to have a long-term outcome that's peaceful and lasting.
Okay, look, there's already a two-state solution. One of them is called Gaza. There's actually three. There's Jordan. Now they want to add a fourth. This is the problem. So what you saw there was, look, I'll give her the benefit of the doubt that she just says this to keep her job. that she doesn't really believe it. That's the kindest thing I can say. I also think that was she's leaving soon. That's a resume builder, so she gets a job with one of the mainstream networks to spew this bile there and get paid better for it than she's getting paid currently. Achieving the Abraham Accords, there's nothing constructive about that. Now, I have my concerns about those things anyway from a Bible prophecy standpoint, but the point is that, so this is what Caroline Glick says in response to Jen Zuckerberg's statement. The asinine statement put forth the notion that Biden will ever opt for an alliance with the Abraham Accords members over the Iran-Hamas axis. Just as the administration refuses to even utter the term Abraham Accords, so it insists on ignoring their political significance for the states of the region and their military capacity to contain Iran. So she says, look, they don't have a touch with reality. This is from the Financial Times, and so this is some of the people. Who won this conflict? Financial Times, we are reclaiming our voice, very pro-Palestinian. Allegations are that Netanyahu did this just to get back into office. This is from the Wall Street Journal yesterday. In Israel, the violent legacy of 1948. Fragile Midi ceasefire is holding, from the Wall Street Journal on yesterday. The UN stepped in. Here's Guterres talking about what the Security Council said about the situation.
I welcome the ceasefire between Gaza and Israel after 11 days of deadly hostilities. I extend my deepest condolences to the victims of the violence and their loved ones. I commend Egypt and Qatar for the efforts carried out in close coordination with the UN to help restore calm to Gaza and Israel, and I call on all sides to observe the ceasefire.
Ambassador Dan to the United Nations talked about, that some states were just happy to see dead Jews. Nobody really mentioned Hamas. At Friday prayers, there were clashes between the police on the Temple Mount and the Muslim worshipers that were there. There was a huge number of them. This is that Washington Post picture. Here's Al-Quds newspaper showing the crowd outside. That's Al-Aqsa Mosque in the distance. So there are a lot of people there. By the way, one point I think is often missed. They always blame the Israeli police, right? How many Jews do you think there are among the Israeli police on the Temple Mount? Take a guess. 0. They're all Arabs. Usually a lot of them Druze, because the Muslims don't even tolerate civilians walking around up there. Do you think they would tolerate actual Jewish police, armed police? No. So the Al-Quds headline is Palestine celebrates the victory of the resistance and Israeli circles admit the defeat. And then here's another picture. Here's some more pictures of what's going on. Lower left is the Temple Mount. Lower right is Gaza City, and above is Nablus, all celebrating this. Here's a picture of a worshiper on the Temple Mount. He's got the head of Hamas, his special scarf. It's signed by him. That's what he's showing. And this article, too, from the Jerusalem Post, the Palestinian Authority Mufti was expelled from prayers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque for not supporting Gaza. Look at this mess. Because he's not anti-Jewish enough. So they're having conflict within their society. So everything is in meltdown. They're getting rid of the Mufti, kicking him out of the Friday prayers. This is from UN News. Ceasefire can't hide the scale of destruction in Gaza. Here is one of our famous. I don't know if I should play this. I'm going to play it. So you might want to stop your ears up for just half a minute. This is Michigan Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib.
We must condition aid to Israel on compliance with international human rights and end the apartheid. We must, with no hesitation, demand that our country recognize the unconditional support of Israel has enabled the erasure of Palestinian life and the denial of the rights of millions of refugees and emboldens the apartheid policy.
Okay, enough of that. Blinken is supposed to go to the Middle East. We still don't have an ambassador to Israel. We do have a very pro-Palestinian envoy who's been over there. I'm sure he's representing the things that a lot of us would like him to represent. Gaza residents return to ruins. This article from the Jerusalem Post, is the Hamas terror army unbeatable? So look, this was an article on Haaretz this morning. Senior IDF officials raised doubts over effectiveness of the Gaza operation. And I think there's something to be said for that. It's estimated that Hamas may still have 90% of the rockets that they had before this conflict. That's a problem. That the tunnel operation was effective, but not entirely effective. And now we have European countries and the U.S. supplying maybe $300 million to Hamas. They're going to rebuild it back. The Times of Israel, the guardian of the walls wasn't the resounding victory the IDF had hoped for. The author says this: the 11 days of fighting in Gaza that made up what the Israeli Defense Forces constitute Operation Guardian of the Walls constituted the first major conflict overseen by Army Chief Avi Kohavi. The results were at best a mixed bag, despite claims by military and political leaders of unprecedented achievements. On a strictly military basis, this round of fighting, Israel emerged the clear victor. The IDF destroyed large amounts of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic weaponry, even killed the head of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Underground tunnels were destroyed, but that the military operation, there's some criticism of the military operation to take out the tunnels, what the IDF calls the Gaza Metro, was maybe not as effective, but it did destroy 60 miles of tunnels. But what will happen is Hamas, if they're not totally destroyed, will rethink their strategy. That's the problem. There's concerns about the lack of bomb shelters. Seth Franzman article, this is Anna's article in the Jerusalem Post, anticipating next round, IDF says was focused on rockets, not tunnels, because they didn't get that many. Seth Franzman article this morning says both sides say they won the war. The head of Hamas thanks Iran. Here's a picture of one of the cars running around London. But here's an interesting story that kind of emerged earlier this week that I think a lot of people missed. This concerns Israel. Hezbollah has dug tunnel network from Beirut to within 3 kilometers of the Israeli border. So depending on how you measured it, if it goes to this port here, this is Metula, Tel Dan is right here, Majel Shams is here, Caesarea Philippi is right in this region. That's probably 40 miles. If you go all the way down here to the other part of the Lebanon border, this is Nahariya in Israel. It's about 6 miles. The center of Nahariya is 6 miles from the Lebanon border. And here you have this, that's 40 miles. This would be about 50 miles. That's a long tunnel. So what if this is what it took for Gaza, what it's going to take for Hezbollah and southern Lebanon and Lebanon? That's unknown. So that's to give you some idea of the distances. So from here along the Lebanon border to central Beirut is about 50 miles. From Quneitra right here to central Damascus here is about 31 to 35 miles, depending on where you start. From Damascus to Beirut is about 50 miles. So that kind of gives you how close together everything is. So they're preparing for war. Iran is changing things. They're changing their tactics. So now they put their militias together after the killing of Soleimani. They're adapting. They're intelligent people. Evil, but intelligent. They're trying to win. Jonathan Spire has a great article in the Jerusalem Post on Friday about the Iran and Hamas's Jerusalem-Gaza offensive. They were working together. So now everybody's sort of taking a breath. What happened? Let me just put it for a moment in a little bit of prophetic perspective, maybe. I've talked about it. I don't know. It's probably been a while since I talked about this. But the book of Obadiah is a prophecy about Edom. Now, I won't go through the long process as to how I came to this conclusion, but the Palestinian people identify themselves with Esau, the descendants of Esau, Ishmael, and there's a passage in Genesis 38, I think, says Esau is Edom, and they identify themselves as Edomites, and so Obadiah is a prophecy against the Edomites. And in this prophecy, you will see, it says here, thou dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high. One of the things you see when you see the Palestinian Authority symbol, it's an eagle. And it talks about the eagle and the clefts, dwelling in the clefts. All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. Shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men out of Edom and understanding out of the mount of Esau? For thy mighty men shall be dismayed, to the end that every one of the mount of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. For thy violence against thy brother Jacob shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. By the way, do you know what the Hebrew word for violence is in this passage? It's pronounced Hamas. You know, this one of these little coincidences. In that day, thou stoodest. What it tells about is that the Edomites stood when Babylonians destroyed the temple. They were the ones who destroyed the temple. And there is a verse here that talks about, here it is. Neither shouldst thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape, neither shouldst thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. So when the Romans came in, they didn't help, I guess is the point, which is kind of the point of what's going on all around the world now. But here it says here, for the day of the Lord is near. I think this destruction happens before the day of the Lord begins. Now, we can argue about when the day of the Lord begins relative to the second coming of the Lord. But we would all agree that this prophecy happens when the day of the Lord is near. So I'm just saying this is something that we might see in the future. For as ye have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and they shall be as though they had not been. But upon Mount Zion shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. So I think this all happens as part of this end time scenario. This is one of the things, and I think a lot of people overlook it. I saw an article, I don't know if it's published yet, Ken Johnson was writing one for Prophecy Watchers that seemed pretty solid. He went through a lot of these passages. So look, this is something that's going to come. It's going to be devastation. I think we need to be careful about celebrating the demise of people that are unsaved. But we do know that God is just and God will deal with people as he sees fit. But there's more coming. If we think this ceasefire is the end-all, be-all, and end-all, not even close. I don't even know if I would call it a ceasefire. I would kind of call it a coffee break, maybe. Because there's going to be stuff. There's riots on the Temple Mount. There's all these things going on in Israel. So it's a very troubling time. We need to stand firm as believers in the gospel of Jesus Christ. and speak the truth to these things. There is a lot going on, and I do know this, that eventually Jesus comes back and rules and reigns from Jerusalem, and we should all look forward to that day. We're not going to make it happen. Jesus will come when it's time. So let's pray. Father, thank you so much. Pray you'll bless us this week. Pray you'll help us to stand firm in an evil day and resist these evil things, but always tempered with love and truth and the gospel of Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.